I'll just start. I'm Maggie. One of my names is Maggie. We were just talking about this before we went live there. I'm a 52-year-old Irish adoptee. I'm a DIA, so domestically adopted within Ireland back in 1974. I was the second child my parents got from the same Catholic adoption agency, and they actually used the same social worker as well. So for both of us, we had the same process. I was placed at 1 month old. I was in an institution before that, and I've been trying to find my information about that particular institution called Temple Hill, which went under St. Patrick's Guild for a lot of my adulthood. Basically, I've always wanted to know my information. My mother and father, adopted mother and father, didn't like talking about adoption at all. It was a very taboo subject in our house. My adopted brother is 1.5 years older than me, and he didn't want to know. He didn't care. Mommy and daddy are mommy and daddy. And that was it. He didn't want to search. He didn't want to talk about it either. So I was in a chasm. I had nobody to talk to. The only other person I knew growing up who was adopted was not a DIA. She was actually a different race. She was a girl in my class. She was adopted to a white family, and she was obviously not their child by birth. So she and I never really talked about adoption either. I still drive by her house now and wonder if she ever searched. So I never had anybody to talk to, and I always thought I was an alien, apparently. When I was growing up, some of my friends who I'd still be in contact with now remember when I was 4 and 5 starting school thinking I was an alien, apparently. I don't remember any of it, but they said, you thought you were dropped down from the heavens above, from space, by a rocket and just landed here, and you were, again, just not known by anybody. And so I've always known I was adopted. My brother and I, we can't remember being told. So that was a good thing. And we were always told we were special, which I still do not like the word to this day. I don't like being referred to, oh, you're special and we chose you, which I found out when I was 38, that that wasn't the truth. I was just the next child in a file, on a list, in an application form that back then in Ireland, to get an adopted child, the process was you got a national newspaper, and in the classified section at the back, there was babies wanted or babies available. The adoption agencies would have had the babies available to a PO box applied to that. So my parents applied to that, and you applied to the PO box. They sent you back an application form. You filled out the application form. You sent that back to the adoption agency social worker, and they would have had an interview at that stage. Some of the questions in the application form were very weird. One was like, are you anxious? How often do you celebrate the sacraments? It was a Catholic adoption agency. Have you got referees? Have to be Catholic, so priests, ideally, nuns, people like that. What age child? What sex child? So mom and dad put in female, any age under 6 months, a girl. And they'd already adopted a boy. And they sent that off for the application, and I became available after I was born in a national maternity hospital in Dublin, and I was sent to the St. Patrick's Guild, Temple Hill, and I was put in a ward, and to this day I still don't know which ward. They were all named religious saints' names, and I don't know where I was. It doesn't specify. But it was under the guise, this Temple Hill place was under the guise of a hospital. They called it a dietetic hospital. And it was meant to be for babies born with health issues particular to the stomach. And there was I found out since, there's no doctors in that place. So they had applied to become a hospital in order to get more state grants. And it was all false. There was only a few nurses. They were training in 16-year-old and 17-year-old girls who wanted to become nurses. And we were placed there with mostly nuns and these 16-year-old girls. and some of them kept mementos of us, so photographs or our little bracelets, and they still have a Facebook page to this day looking for people to match up with, because a lot of them, what we say in Ireland, stood for us. So they would have been our godmothers when we were finally baptized, because it was a Catholic baby home, no mothers and babies. It was just a baby home. So basically an orphanage without being orphans. And they would bring us in, but we were told by the staff that they would never let us out being unbaptized. We had to be baptized. They were in the business of saving souls for God, was what I was specifically told. So interestingly, when I look for any, not just mine, any baptism records for that baby home, there's none available, not one. And thousands of us went through there. Many ended up going to Philadelphia specifically, but a lot of different places in America. And I found out years later that my husband's uncle, who he never knew existed, was born illegitimate and stayed in the same place I was for 3 years, and then was sent off to Philadelphia. So that's a lot about my early life information, but I wouldn't have been able to find out a great deal of that, because in Ireland the system was, it was sealed. You couldn't get, I mean, you could get a tiny bit of information, but the majority of it was not available to us as adoptees. The law was that we weren't even allowed to have our birth certificate. So the birth certificate would have stated our birth mother's name, sometimes the birth father's name, where we were born, and the date we were born, and her address. And that was too much information to give to an adoptee in a closed adoption, so we weren't allowed to have that. So what we were given instead is what we called the adoption cert. That's just what we call it. It's not actually the adoption cert. It's a section of the register from our registration of adoption. So on that, it will say that your adoptive father's name, your adoptive mother's name, your new name, and your date of birth. Whether that's been changed or not, that's you won't know unless your adoptive parents told you. So there's very little in that. So say I went to school and they needed proof of my birth. Everybody else was bringing in their birth certificates. I was bringing in this totally different adoption certificate, which says adoption registration over the top of it. So it's very clear. And it just meant that yours was different to everybody else's. It was singled out. Complete strangers could be able to just glance at it and see that you were adopted from that. So very little privacy, what we call GDPR here in Ireland now under the EU laws. So we, as adoptees, would have just known our adoptive name. So we had very little to go on. Like I say, even your birth date could have been changed. So growing up, I always want to know if my birth date was changed and also what name I was given. I know a lot of people were given baby girl or baby boy. I just had a feeling I had a name. So when I turned 18, I went to the adoption agency that I was adopted through, and all of my files and everything, paperwork, my mother was meticulous in keeping that under lock and key. Everything was kept away from us. But when I was 18, I knew my adoption agency, because in the meantime, they were very good at contacting adoptive parents all over Ireland at Christmas time, especially, to look for Christmas donations, which, as far as I could understand, was basically, hope your child is doing well. If there's any problem with giving us any money, we could probably take that child back. So very Christian. Anyway, I knew who my adoption agency was. I went up to that door and knocked on the door. They brought me in. It was horrendous. I still remember to this day. The whole atmosphere was horrible. The lady was horrible. I found out afterwards the social worker I was chatting to was the same lady who had handed me to my parents. So basically, she was completely biased. She was, as far as I'm concerned, sitting there going, how dare you turn up 18 years later looking for more, like in Oliver, more? All I wanted was to know about me. So I knew my baptism was a little bit different as well, because I was baptized in an unusual place, and it wasn't in a local place after my mom and dad had got me. So there was questions about my baptism, because apparently I was baptized in the baby home I was put in, and then baptized when my mother and father got me, which can't happen. The first initial baptism is the only legal, proper baptism. So I still have questions about that. Anyway, she wasn't going to give me much information. I was 18 at the time, but she actually looked down at me and she said, "Does your mother and father know you're here?" And I said, "I'm an adult. I can be here of my own volition." And she said, "Does your mother and father know you're here?" I said, "I'm allowed to get my information." She said, "No, you're not." So straight away I knew I was on a losing battle there. And I wasn't supposed to talk about adoption to my parents. They just shut that conversation down from a very young age. And it upset my mother. Didn't matter about me, but it upset my mother, so I wasn't allowed to talk about it to them. So here I wasn't going to get anything from my social worker at the age of 18. I had to go and talk to my parents about what I was doing, searching, why I wanted to know, all my inner feelings, how it was affecting me, and it was just horrible. But anyway, I went home. I don't remember having that conversation. And a year later, it took me up to a year to build up the courage to go knocking on that door again. She brought me in. She had my file about a foot away from me, and at the other side of the desk. She opened it up, and you could tell she was nitpicking what she'd tell me and what she wouldn't tell me. And she said the words, "Oh, she was 31 when she had you." And I just broke down crying, because I had expected like 17, a girl who got herself into trouble, not a 31-year-old capable woman working in a big city, away from home, independent. I just broke down crying, and she sat there looking at me for about a minute and said, "I don't know what you're crying about. It's not like I told you you were the product of a rape." And I just hadn't considered that. I hadn't even considered that. And I was like, oh my God, my world. I don't know how I got home that day, but I was like, I'm never going to that door again. I'm like, these are the people supposed to be on my side. This is my social worker supposed to be representing me and my best interests. And she's so completely horrible. So completely horrible. But yeah, just she was a horrible woman. She was just one of those people, even when she wrote letters to me afterwards to say like, "Oh, I won't be handling your case anymore. I'm handing it to another social worker called whatever, contact her." She was just so cold and very flippant. And yeah, I found out anyway that she was the lady who had handed me to my adoptive parents, and therefore she wasn't willing to concede that she hadn't done a good job in doing that, although it was nothing to do with her. So I kind of let that lie for a long time, and I had my kids and went through everything that everyone else goes through. You know, is there a history of this? Is there a history of that? Why don't you want to know? Would you like to know? Who are your real parents? And all the stuff that we go through. And then I got sick in 2012, and they thought I had 5 possible diagnoses, and 3 of them were cancer. And my adoptive mother had just died from lung cancer, and they thought it was lung cancer. So I was with 3 kids, very worried about whether I was going to be able to tell them anything, never mind for me. So I said, I have to look. It's not a case of wanting to. I have to look. I have to search a bit more. So that was the impetus really for me, searching a bit more. But again, back then in Ireland, we weren't allowed anything. So there was so many barriers in the way. You had to have helpful people, maybe private detectives. We'd no DNA really back then. That was in 2012 as well. So I wasn't really able to find an awful lot of information. But what I did find, I tried to search with that. But I found out then that I asked all these questions. In Ireland, we have what we call the Adoption Rights Alliance. So it's kind of like this. It's where adoptees get together in the Irish experience and explain to each other how they did this or where you should go to find out that. So I found out that you could send like 40 questions to your adoption agency, and if you wrote it down, they had to write down the answers back. So there was more than I knew before, and it was actually a revelation to me that I could get my birth certificate if I had the right information. I actually thought it was illegal for me to get my birth certificate because of the way that everybody worded it, that you can't have it, you're not allowed it. I thought it was illegal, but it's just nearly impossible the way they did it. That's really the case. So I found out a lot of my information when I was 38. And I found out that I had a half brother that my birth mother also had before me, and also given up before me. His name was Paul, and he didn't know about me. I didn't know about him, and our birth mother didn't want to know about us. So she had gone on to get married, had 4 other children. Her husband had known, but he died, so the secret died. And the social worker had got in contact with her, and she was very upset and not happy, and she just wanted the whole secrecy to remain, but also the whole episode to go away. So that was painful in itself. So what I call rejection, secondary rejection from her. We did finally get to meet, myself and Paul, and we're still close. We still chat. I read at his wedding, and my daughter was his flower girl. But we had joined in 2007, we joined what Ireland had opened up at that stage called a contact preference register. So it's a register. I think a lot of places do this at this stage, where, if an adoptee wants to contact somebody from their birth family, that can be accommodated, and vice versa. But also it's a contact preference register. So whatever preference of contact you want. So minimal, none, that comes into play. And that opened up in 2007. I joined it immediately as soon as I could. Paul had joined it immediately as soon as he could. And they did not match us for 5 years. So when I queried that after the fact, they said that they only used to match up parents to children. Yet they gave you the list of who would you like contact from. So I called bullshit on that one. Then we did meet up, and we, as I say, are close, but the birth mother didn't really want to meet up, but it did happen, and it was probably one of the most awkward moments of my life. But anyway, it wasn't exactly like long lost families like to portray. Let's just say it was quite muted. I kept handing her water and tissues. It was not good. But I found out a little bit of information, and we thought that was going to be our one and only meeting, but it ended up being one of, I think, 6 we met her in total. But like, if you're to add up all of the hours that we'd met, basically probably about 7-8 hours in total, I'd met her in my adulthood. She did not like me because I kept pushing for her to tell her 4 children from her marriage, which would be my half brothers and sisters. And you could see it was weighing on her, and I was trying to get her to relieve some of that stress. Anyway, it went quiet. We went no contact. And in the end, the last contact I had from her was in April on my birthday. She sent me a card that said happy birthday with a little puppy. And inside was a letter saying, don't come to my funeral. When I die, I only want people who have loved me there. And I was like, didn't plan on going anyway. But yeah, she wasn't the nicest of ladies. But I mean, I can see from her point of view why she just didn't want me around. I mean, I would have sent her a Christmas card, maybe a Mother's Day card, and that would have been it. I wouldn't have been in her ear all the time, but she just didn't want anything to do with myself or Paul. But at least the secret was out and everybody knew about it, so I was delighted about that. Now, since then, all of the secrecy has basically been blown open, because in Ireland we had the Mother and Baby Home Commission of Investigation, and we've also had new legislation. So it meant that we have rights, obviously fundamental, equal, civil human rights, inalienable rights, and we should have been given them and afforded them all the way along anyway. But anyway, we finally got them. Some things are good and some things are bad. Now, we did get an apology, so the apology is quite relevant to the UK situation at the moment. Now, I'd have to go back to the Mother and Baby Home Commission of Investigation, which was established in 2015 here in Ireland. And it was I'll read it out. It was to provide a full account of what happened to vulnerable women and children in mother and baby homes during the period in Ireland of 1922 to 1998. That was when the last mother and baby home closed up in Donegal. So 76 years. And they did a report. It took longer than they had anticipated. So the final report was submitted on the 30th of October 2020. So it was operating for just short of 6 years, and we were very frustrated by that stage. But the final report did come to pass. They only investigated what we like to call a handful of institutions, so 18 in total. And they said that was just going to be an overview of the institutions. So there was going to be institutions, but also county homes. In Ireland, we're divided up into different counties, and each county would have had their own home as such, which was like a mother and baby home institution, except one county, County Louth. It's only a small county. We call it the wee county. It didn't have enough population to warrant one, so everybody else did. And they only took a handful of those as an example of what went on in those places for those 76 years. And they promised us at the time that they would look at the small number of institutions, these 18 institutions they were going to look at, but that the final report and any recommendations coming from that would not be just limited to those 18 institutions, that they would bring that out to every institution that there was, bearing in mind there would have been well over 100. So we went on the premise that, yeah, that's fine as long as we're all amalgamated at the end. So again, call bullshit because they didn't do that. So the Birth Information and Tracing Act, that came into place on October the 3rd, 2022. So we've been 3.5 years plus of having that up and running. And that was as a result of doing that commission of investigation. I'll read out what they said in the Birth Information and Tracing Act. This is from the Irish government. Those who were adopted, boarded out, which is like a pre-foster situation. We had a pre-foster system called boarding out. So those who were adopted, boarded out, subject to an illegal birth registration or suspected they were, or spent time in a mother and baby or county home institution as a child, now have a guaranteed right of access to information and records about their birth and early life where this information is available. For those actively seeking to locate and make contact with a birth relative, a tracing service is also available. The tracing service can assist with sharing info while supporting a level of contact, if any, that both parties are comfortable with. We will have a contact preference register. Even though I had done one, they basically replaced it. And that was open to applications on the 1st of July 2020. So that just replaced what was already there. We were very adamant at the time that they should not wipe out any information from the previous contact preference register, because some of those mothers may have died. And if an adoptee went looking for her information from the previous one, we should have that available to us. I have yet to see if that is still available to us. I actually should check that out. So that was made available in July 2020, and it's available to those wishing to make contact to request privacy or to possibly seek or share information with a birth relative. That's all available through birthinfo.ie. So for anybody who's looking for Irish information, birthinfo.ie would be the place to start. I'd recommend it. That would also give more information on the Act, Service Users Advisory Group as well. That's a new thing. The Service User Advisory Group has just come into play. They were actually looking for people to join this service user advisory group because it's up and running 3.5 years now. They want a statutory review of the Birth Information and Tracing Act that came into play in 2020. So they're getting some of us, mind blown here, who are actually affected by it, to review it. It's looking to reveal the main problems with the legislation, highlight other issues. And there are problems with the legislation, and there are issues. And what some people are mentioning in order to try and get the law, which came into play in 2022, a little bit more streamlined, they're saying that what's happening in those 3.5 years of having the law changed is that we're still getting redactions. Also, what are our rights regarding redactions? It's not clear. Like, are we allowed to keep reapplying? Do we appeal and it'll get changed? They're still saying GDPR, the privacy rights in Europe, come into play regarding mothers, even though some of the mothers, and the majority of them, I would suggest at this stage, have died since. But their privacy supersedes our need to know. So we're trying to find out about and get clarification on those redactions. Some people are saying that the tracing services available through this new act are vague and there's too much uncertainty. So for an example, there's no clear update. So say if I apply to look for my birth mother, I could be waiting on a system for a year, 2 years. 18 months seems to be the average. So there's nothing, you're not getting updates in the meantime to find out, well, is that a system error? Is it because there's no information? Have I not given enough information from my end? There's just no clarity. The current process is too grey. So has no one matched with you? Do they want no contact? So similar to that, what I've previously mentioned. We're wondering, is the service inundated, which we had worried about before it came online. We were wondering if there was going to be hiring of anybody and everybody just to tick those boxes and say that they're providing a service. And that seems to be the case, because actually we are waiting a year before somebody will contact us regarding our inquiries in order to join the system to do the tracing. So obviously they're inundated. We're saying that they should have, which is a good idea, a tracking facility similar to what you get for tracking your parcels and your deliveries. That if you go into the system, surely we should be able to check where we are within that system. Are we closer to getting any answers? Are we never going to get any answers? Who's handling our case? There's none of that clarity. There's definite room for improvement. They're saying that there's a lack of transparency, resources, there's unaccountability, and there's non-commitment. Again, similar to before the law even changed. Also, this is an interesting one. So I think this is something that you wouldn't have made note of before the law changed. So when you go and look for your information, officials ask, who have you contacted? And a lot of us, a lot of the older adoptees as well, wouldn't have had a lot of access to technology. So they were writing their freedom of informations. They were writing their subject access requests in order to get their information. And they would have been sending them to adoption agencies, social workers, the Adoption Authority of Ireland, TUSLA, which is the family resource, kind of what would be similar to, what do they call it in the UK? The ones who can take your kids, and family, whatever it's called, I've gone blank. But a lot of our also Irish adoptees would have been sending them to anybody and everybody who could have given us, because somebody you knew from down the road might have said, oh, have you tried them? Or have you tried them? But when you go and contact the officials, they ask you, who have you already contacted? And a lot of us wouldn't have kept records of who we've contacted. So it's relevant in that, are they trying to double check what you already know? That shouldn't be relevant, because just give me what you know. Also, we find that when we do look, places have discarded, destroyed, or lost our records anyway, as everybody is very well familiar with. Also, those living away from Ireland, they don't have access to who are the Irish authorities who can help you, like the Adoption Rights Alliance. They wouldn't know that we're part of Europe, so we have the SARS available to us, so it's like the Freedom of Information, and that we have GDPR also because we're still in the EU. So they did send out information when the law changed to, I think, specifically America and England, but who did that reach? It's vague. We find out also that when we send our Freedom of Informations and our subject access requests, the SARS from the EU end of things, we're just getting duplication back of what we already had prior to the law or since the law has changed. But also you do get a little bit snippets of new information there and then. So that just shows that there was information to be had. But we're also left feeling that there may still be more information, because if I checked that time and I got this little bit, maybe I'll check again and I'll get another little bit. So tantalizing, but traumatizing. Yeah, we also query about the staff who were hired to search for our records. A lot of people's experiences since the law has changed has been that they're woefully inexperienced. They don't get our points of view. They don't understand where we're coming from, and yet they'd be the first ones to say, I understand. No, you don't. Oh, that must be frustrating. No, frustrating is when you can't find a parking spot on a Saturday in the shopping centre, not whether I'm going to die from cancer. So don't be patronising. So yeah, it's working at it over 1 year for contact. So very frustrating, very slow, and basically inept. As regards the apology, so when I mentioned that they did the Commission of Investigation checking out 18 institutions, and they promised that it would be widespread, it wouldn't just stay within those 18 institutions, that was a lie. There was an apology on the day that the Minister and our Taoiseach, who is our Prime Minister, stood up in our Parliament, and they gave their apologies, the state apologies, to us, but they didn't. So this is relevant to you guys in the UK. They gave apologies to the people who were in those 18 institutions. They didn't go outside the realm of that. They didn't blanket apologize for anybody and everybody who was touched by this forced adoptions or by adoptions or by the systemic abuses over the years. They didn't blanket apologize. They just apologized regarding to those institutions that were specifically mentioned within the Commissions of Investigation's remit. So I sat here in the same room and I took down, I spent 3 days, I think, taking down the Prime Minister's and the Minister's 2 apologies so that I had it word for word. And in no part of either apology did they make reference to anybody outside the Commission of Investigation's remit. So if you're looking for an apology, which I know you are, it's very, very relevant that they don't just specify a certain group of people, that everybody needs to be blanket apologized to, because I feel like my institution wasn't investigated in that Commission of Investigation. My experience was not heard because I wasn't investigated. I wasn't brought forward to give my tuppence worth, and I wasn't apologized to. So the Commission of Investigation, while very expensive, and I suppose it was good advertising for them at the time that they were so benevolent, it didn't affect me whatsoever, except that the law has changed since and that they have put in recommendations. So things like the tracing and stuff like that. But the Commission of Investigation itself did not affect me and many thousands of others. And they say we won't be getting any redress, even though the 18 institutions and a couple of others outside that are getting redress because of the Commission of Investigation. It was one of the recommendations. It's part of the reparations section. But I specifically, in my case, won't be getting any redress because I was in my institution for less than 6 months. To have an arbitrary 6 months minimum time spent within these institutions, but they wanted womb-wet babies. So, plus our minister at the time stated, it doesn't really matter because you won't remember. So that was our minister stating that we didn't remember. So because we were under 6 months old, we won't be getting any redress. And then we were in one of the, I specifically myself was in one of those institutions that was not in the remit of the commission's investigation. So even if I got it on one, I wouldn't have got it on the other, and vice versa. Plus, the starting point for redress is €5,000. Now, I don't know how much therapy costs wherever you guys are, but €5,000 wouldn't go too far with my kind of therapy. I've never had therapy, but I imagine it's going to be a lot more than €5,000. You wouldn't get a decent second-hand car for €5,000. So where are you going with your €5,000, lads? Because it's not going to affect me in any grand way. I'd rather give it away to charity so I know it's doing some good. But it's the principle. The principle that I've been excluded arbitrarily on 2 counts for the place I was in and for the amount of time I was in it. And then you're going to offer me €5,000 of your 800 million budget. Bearing in mind that they spent €20,000 on the carpets for the place they were going to do the commission of investigation in. So this is where the money is going. And for their, what did we call, woefully inexperienced staff who are taking up to a year to even look at our applications. And to still, at the end of it all, get redactions in our files. Still not have a proper apology. And not be much better off, in fairness. But yet they think they're great and they're patting themselves on the back. Anyway, another thing that really gets on my nerves is that there's a lot, I don't know if people understand, there's a difference between mother and baby homes and Magdalene laundries. So there's been a lot of films about Magdalene laundries. Cillian Murphy was in one quite recently. So Magdalene laundry is basically a jail. That's the best way of describing it. Women were put in there, girls as well, were put in there, and they were made to work slave labor for no money, dire conditions, incarcerated. Even though the Commission of Investigation said that they were free to go, they weren't. If you left, the police here in Ireland, the Gardaí, brought you back. They were Magdalene laundries, and that's just a female jail. Then mother and baby homes, the clue is in the title. So women went in there, had their babies. Sometimes they were kept there because maybe they owed money for their keep, and they would have stayed minding the babies or else kept away. It depended on the institution. And there was also baby homes. So the place I was in was just a baby home. There was no mothers and babies. So I was born in a maternity hospital. My mother left after a week, which I think was the usual time of after you've had a baby back in 1974. And she left me behind. I was put in this baby home. So some were mother and baby homes, some were just baby homes, some were just mother homes. There was one in Stamullen, which was a mother home. And we've been left out of the redress and the investigation because of the specificity of those areas. It wasn't a mother and baby home. The place I was in, actually, interestingly, they were allowed to do experiments on us as babies. So GlaxoSmithKline, back then were called the Wellcome Group, 2 L's, WELLCOME. So it was an old iteration of their names. Companies changed the names over the years, but it's basically GlaxoSmithKline. And they were doing drug trials, vaccine trials, and baby formula trials on us in these places during specific eras, so particular years, not just the place I was in, a few different places. And they've been very good. They've opened up their records to such a degree that they will investigate themselves to see if we are in their records. So I myself looked just before COVID to see if I was experimented on, and they searched themselves and investigated themselves and came back with, lo and behold, no, Maggie, you weren't experimented on. So all clear here, nothing to see. Move along. So the transparency is just amazing to me. Very, very good. But they won't give out redress. They will accommodate us to check, in that they will look at themselves, at their own records, and find, lo and behold, the 99% of people weren't in their experiments. So I have been avoiding GlaxoSmithKline since then. It's what we call a boycott. Anyway, there's just no transparency in the system, and there has to be transparency for it to be fair, equal, and actually evolving system, because it hasn't evolved if we're still in the dark. Another thing I wanted to touch on was, hopefully nobody's too bored at this stage. Sorry, I do talk fast and I do talk. I wonder where I get that from. So the Birth Information and Tracing Act I have here from 2022, it was signed into law on the 30th of June in 22, with the info and tracing services opening for applications on the 3rd of October 2022, so over 3 years ago. They describe it as landmark legislation, which provides a full and clear right of access to birth certs, birth and early life info for all persons, I have that underlined, who were adopted, boarded out, pre-foster care, the subject of an illegal registration. It's interesting to put down illegal registration, because they would not for a long, long time say illegal. They would say irregular registration. An illegal registration is basically where you have a birth certificate and it says that you were born to these parents. You just find out years later that, in fact, that's a complete and utter lie, that somebody else birthed you and they passed you off as their own for years and years and years. And they would, in Ireland specifically, and very, very forcefully say irregular birth certificate. That's illegal. If I was to say that I died on the Titanic yesterday with Brad Pitt as my husband, and I had an elephant gun in my hand, that's an illegal registration of death. Or if I was to say that I married Brad Pitt 2 days ago in the safari, and we had Genghis Khan and Hitler as our witnesses, again, that's an illegal marriage registration. So why they did not for a long time call it an illegal birth registration defied logic to me, because it was illegal every step of the way. So they were saying that it was anybody in the new law, we would be able to get have access to our questions in relation to our origins, which, in fairness, that means a lot to an adopted person, to have access to any questions in relation to our origins. It allows access to info by next of kin in certain circumstances. So I haven't seen that happening too often, where maybe an adult child of somebody who's died since has applied on their behalf to try and get more information about what their mother went through in a mother and baby home, or their sibling as an adoptee would have gone through. But again, we need more clarification on this. It needs to be brought to the media in order to help us shed some light. It said that they were going to have robust tracing service. Now, again, they're leaving us a year. They have woefully inadequate staff. We're still getting redactions. So where's the robust part of this tracing service? The contact preference register is replacing the previous one. Again, the clarity on what happened to the previous one and why was I left on it myself for 5 years. They have bespoke measures to address issues arising by illegal birth registration. I know an illegal birth registered adoptee, and she got nothing. Nothing. To me, the very bare minimum initially should have been, here's a DNA test. Here's support. Here's other adoptees in your situation who were illegally registered. Talk to them. Nothing. She got nothing. Not even a pamphlet. It should also include a broad spectrum of counselling and support which is available. The counselling support is a joke. They call support the Adoption Authority of Ireland. When I went to them and they gave me some information and I went back to them to get more information, they denied me the original information. I applied for a a chat with them, so a meeting with them. And basically, I was bringing to their attention that they had given me this. Now they're denying me this. What's happened in the meantime? They had two highly paid barristers sitting beside them saying, this is why you're not allowed it, because it gives information on your birth mother. And I said, you gave me this previously. And they were trying to justify that they had also redacted out my adoptive parents' names, my adoptive home address, and my adoptive brother's name. I said to them specifically, I remember, with pure venom in my voice, that this was the only bloody information I had for 43 years at that stage, was my birth, my adoptive mother's information name, my adoptive father's name, my address, and my brother. And now you're taking that from me too. I didn't have any birth information, and you're taking the adoptive information from me. And I obviously know that, because the gadget in Men in Black didn't work on me. This neuralizer didn't feckin' come out of anywhere from you guys to say that I'm not now allowed that information, my adoptive information. Make it make sense. Why are you paying these two people thousands upon thousands to sit there and justify you're not telling me, as the Adoption Authority of Ireland, my own adoptive information, which I obviously know? I mean, you're supposed to be representing me as the adoptee, which is what in their, what did they call it? Can't remember. But anyway, their memo for working, their idea for all that they do. So you're supposed to get support from them? No. TUSLA, so that's the family. If anybody knows anything about the Irish system, TUSLA are bloody useless. Then there's the National Counselling Service. I don't know them from Adam, but I know the majority of them are not qualified to deal with adoption-specific information and dealing with adoptees, and Samaritans as well. So they also give you out the Samaritans number. So they're not competent within our specific area. So those three support agencies, next to useless. I found myself the only way of actually getting support is from you guys, from talking to other adoptees. But what I think is crucial is in Sean McDermott Street, which is in Dublin. It used to be a Magdalene Laundry, and it was going to be made into a kind of a hostel owned by a Japanese conglomerate. There was a big fuss about it, so the Irish government bought it out. Hallelujah. And I don't know how many years ago that was, long time ago. And they're still coming up with plans to make it into a hub. But also it's going to house mothers, young mothers with babies. So that's good, because that's a fingers up to the Catholic Church. But it's going to also be an education centre in general. It's not just specifically for adoptees or people affected by adoption or fostering or anything like that. It's actually a general help the community kind of a place. And we're angry about that, because if they really did give a shit about us, surely that would have been put in place first and forward, because we would then have a hub to go to talk to each other as Irish adoptees, or anybody who's coming into the system to learn about Irish adoption. And we would have that as someplace central in order to have our woes heard and have therapy there, or have some kind of an exhibition there to be able to show what's happened over the years, and make it available for schools now to be able to learn what went on. That's not that long ago, and learn from those bad lessons. But that hasn't happened yet. So it just shows everybody in Ireland that, like, you don't give a crap. Plus, why one in Dublin? There should be one in each province. There's 4 provinces in Ireland: Ulster, Munster, Leinster, and Connacht. Surely having one hub in each of those areas, so that an elderly mother, birth mother, and person who's adopted, who's getting older as well, can have access within their own area. But again, they don't ask us for our opinions until after it's happened, or they've already put plans in place, like this Sean McDermott Street one. We went to a big meeting there, a year and a half ago, and they told us what's happening. And everybody was up in arms saying, why didn't we have this meeting 3 years ago to say what we'd like to happen? Why weren't you asking us how it should happen, what we needed to happen? And it's still not in place. As usual, like in Ireland, anything takes 5 times as long and takes 6 times more money. A lot of the anger within Ireland still at the moment is Tuam. I don't know if anybody's heard of Tuam. So Tuam is a name of a town in County Galway, Tuam. It actually comes from the word tomb, which is ironic. And Tuam kind of blew up when Catherine Corliss found, she was a local historian, she found that there was anomalies in the recording of deaths of babies, infants and children in the Tuam Mother and Baby Home, which was run by the Bon Secours Sisters of Charity. They ran quite a few. That was up and running from 1925 to 1961. And Catherine Corliss, who, as far as I'm concerned, should be a saint, she found that there was unrecorded infant deaths up to approximately 796. And they were buried in unmarked graves located in what is now known as a disused sewage tank. And it blew up when it was found in the newspapers. It went viral. It went all over the world. It was international news. It took 11 years before they put a shovel in the ground. 11 years. And that's only happened recently. And there's still the naysayers and the people who deny that this ever happened at all. But anyway, they'll meet their maker. To date, the remains of 69 babies have been uncovered during the excavation that has happened. They were found in coffins. The coffins have decayed. They were white. And in a small number of instances, 2 or 3 individuals were buried in the same coffin. This is through the excavation that they've started. But this is in an area that's close to the memorial garden. If you think of Tuam, they usually show a picture of a statue of Our Lady in a corner area of a playground, in a grassy corner. But they haven't checked any real major areas that they believe that the bodies are located. So they found these coffins in an area where it's outside the memorial garden, where significant quantities of bones were found during an initial probe by the Commission of Investigation. That's a decade ago. Excavation work at the site began in July 2025. So they're estimating it'll take about 3 years. They also wanted DNA from mothers, fathers, siblings, grandparents, aunts and uncles, but they neglected to state cousins. And a lot of people at this generation would be cousins. So why would they leave out the cousins part? So now they're basically going back on that, and they're really investigating to let cousins or people who believe that they might be related to any of the babies that they will locate there, and believe through the cousin line that they're going to be allowed to do that now. But again, that's how the Irish do it. Like, just have had it in the first place and set it up properly. So that was a whole scandal. And it's been 11 years since Catherine Corliss uncovered all that. So things don't work fast here, but hopefully they'll start moving along at this stage now, because people are getting way older and sicker and more fragile and not able.